Ready to go? Okay. Good morning, good morning. If your thoughts are as tall as the height of your ceiling, you cannot fly above your room. And what separates a weak dreamer and a great dreamer is that the weak dreamer is wishing and waiting, while the great dreamer is willing and working. These are the wise words of Israel Aivo, a 31-year-old Ghanaian author and speaker. And they resonate very well as they serve to motivate us to challenge ourselves to work harder and contribute meaningfully to the democratic project in our country. Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Angelo Kumalo, Mr. Tembi Somsomi, the editor of the Sunday Times, Mr. Jonas Wohoshi, the CEO of BCX, the organizers and hosts of the Directors event since 2015, my fellow speakers and panel members, captains of industry and leaders that are joining this 7th edition of South Africa's biggest boardroom meeting. What will it take to strengthen our country's democracy and build confidence by enabling oversight? Democracy, as a word, originates from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. Democracy, therefore, ought to empower people, all people, or at least the majority of people. Confidence comes from the Latin word confidere, meaning have full trust. In addressing today's topic, strengthening democracy and public confidence by enabling oversight, my perspective is that of the Auditor-General of South Africa, the Chapter 9 institution for which I work. However, being at this august assembly of public and private sector leaders, I will touch on what every leader in these sectors across our broader society could indeed contribute. In our daily professional lives collectively, we are offered opportunities to make a lasting, impactful difference to the lives of South Africans. Since we are at South Africa's biggest board meeting, let us recall the key purpose of any board. The Institute of Directors sums it up as to ensure the company's prosperity by collectively directing the company's affairs while meeting the appropriate interests of shareholders and of relevant stakeholders. At the AGSA, the Auditor-General of South Africa, we are mandated by the Constitution of the Republic to enable oversight and public accountability through our work. In our line of work, we produce audit reports and present them to our auditees, to Parliament, and to legislatures, as well as the local councils. And we do so that we enable them to oversight their own administrations, as well as the political leadership, and make sure that they hold them to account. Our audit reports cover a number of areas. First area is on the credibility of financial information. The second area is on the usefulness and reliability of performance information. And the third area relates to compliance with key laws and regulations that relate to financial and performance management. So often when we talk about clean audits, it relates to an auditee that has demonstrated credibility of financial statements and published those, and has published a useful and reliable performance report, and doesn't have significant findings related to compliance with laws and regulations. And we complete these audits and related reports year on year without fail. However, after many years of us repeating the same message, one about there being no meaningful improvements on audit outcomes, no sustainable solutions to improving controls and disciplines over financial management, we continued to report about growing irregular expenditure, and we continued to lament about the lack of consequence management. After many years of us saying the same thing, change was inevitable. In 2019, in the month of April, the President of the Republic signed into law amendments to the Public Audit Act, which enabled the Auditor-General to not only report on audit outcomes, but also to enforce accountability. We're required to exercise our powers where accounting officers fail to enforce accountability, because they're required to do so in terms of the PFMA. So we step in when they don't do what they're supposed to do. And by accounting officers, we mean those that head up the administration of public institutions. That would be the directors general, the heads of department, the municipal managers. And in the context of public entities, such as state-owned entities, the law refers to accounting authorities, which essentially are the boards. So we are directing our effort and our reports and our action towards the people that are entrusted with managing public funds. And as I say, we act only if they do not. So the amendments are really intended as a complementary mechanism in the broader public sector accountability value chain. The enhanced powers, which we have implemented now for just over 2 years, require us to identify material irregularities and ensure that these are acted upon by accounting officers and accounting authorities. The material irregularity is very similar to a reportable irregularity in the private sense. So an MI, by definition, refers to any non-compliance, any contravention of legislation, any fraud, theft, or even any breach of fiduciary duty, which we identify through our audit. And where that sort of non-compliance has the impact, or is likely to have the impact of financial loss, of misuse or loss of a public resource, or causing substantial harm to a public sector institution or to the general public. In enforcing accountability, we're required to refer the identified material irregularity to a public body with a mandate for investigations or for law enforcement. So here we will be referring matters to the SIU, to the Hawks, to the police, or to the NPA. And we're required to then include specific recommendations in our audit report on what should be done to address the matter. If our recommendations are then implemented, we don't have to step in any further. It is only if there's failure to implement our recommendations that the matter escalates. And at this point, we would then be able to take binding remedial action. And if the accounting officer or accounting authority still fails to implement that binding remedial action, then we can issue what is called a certificate of debt in the name of the accounting officer or even members of the board that had failed to implement their powers and execute on their given responsibilities. So it's really about making sure that we do enforce accountability. I've mapped out a process which does sound long, and it does because it takes time. And that's because we've designed it to ensure that we exercise our powers in accordance with the principles of fair administrative justice. Whilst the process does not lead us to sending people to jail, as some may have suggested, it can get us to effect visible consequences for wrongdoing. Importantly, these powers create an opportunity for us to contribute to improving the responsiveness of those appointed as stewards of public funds. And we do so that they may prioritize the changes that are necessary to improve performance, accountability, and integrity of public institutions. Over the last cycle of the provincial and national government audits, we identified 75 material irregularities valued at a financial loss of 6.9 billion rand on aggregate. And these are under our watchful eye for implementation. So we will continue to watch whether the accounting officers and accounting authorities do that which they're supposed to do, which would be fixing the internal controls that failed, reporting matters for law enforcement where that becomes a feature, recovering funds that are lost, and taking disciplinary action against officials that either underperformed or transgressed the law. And where the actions are deemed to be appropriate and adequate, then we need not act any further. It is only when we do not believe that there's adequate action being taken that we will indeed escalate the matter and exercise our powers further. So I'm sharing with you what the supreme audit institution of our country is doing to step up and to make sure that we do support democracy. My over 3,500 colleagues and I will continue to find every opportunity to improve what we do and how we do it, so that we progressively realize our ambition of strengthening democracy and delivering value and benefits to society. We appreciate that the impact of our work will be felt if other parts of South Africa Inc. also work. The project of building the South Africa that we all dream of, one that we all deserve, requires that all of us work collectively towards it. And the collective that I refer to covers all of us that hold positions of responsibilities in any part of SA Inc. Whether we are in the public or private sector, all of us that are entrusted with leading roles within institutions, in whatever capacity, whether it is in the executive or the non-executive sphere, we share a duty to act as stewards over the capital that is allocated to us, deploy it such that it delivers value and benefit to shareholders and relevant stakeholders, and ensure that we account transparently for our decisions and actions, and thereby enhance public trust and confidence in the institutions that we lead. South Africa Inc., as it is today, continues to battle with alarming inequality, grinding poverty, and growing unemployment. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought into very sharp focus the impact of these challenges, these same challenges, especially in the light of weak capabilities within government. Our experiences, our shared experiences over the last 14 months have highlighted the urgency with which we must work collectively and cohesively to design and implement the solutions that are both effective and sustainable. At a minimum, we have to ensure that each of us who are entrusted with leadership responsibilities in an institution is concerned with meeting his or her obligations to society in its breadth and complexity. Each of us that serves as a member of a board of directors is charged with the duty to exercise effective oversight so as to, and I'll quote again, ensure that the company or the organization or indeed the country's prosperity is achieved, and to direct the affairs of our institutions while meeting the appropriate interests of shareholders and broader relevant stakeholders. That's how we're going to inspire confidence, strengthen democracy, and deliver lasting value and benefits to citizens. Master of ceremonies, our failure to run our institutions such that we do inspire public confidence is a bigger threat to our democracy than we realize. Such failures manifest directly in the work that we do as auditors of state institutions. When we conduct our audits in each institution, we look at whether in the course of acquiring goods and services, that government department or public entity or municipality has complied with key laws and regulations relating to procurement and contract management. These prescripts are designed to ensure that the public institutions comply with the provisions of Section 217 of the Constitution of the Republic, which states that public procurement must be undertaken in a manner that is fair, transparent, provides equitable access to opportunities to deal with government, is competitive and cost-effective. And we find through all of our audits that the vast majority of our auditees have audit findings in this very area of procurement and contract management, and we report on this every year. It is these non-compliance findings that mostly result in the irregular expenditure number that we report on every year. And yes, the primary responsibility to ensure that these noble constitutional principles are met rests with the people entrusted with running government. The reality is that on the other side of each transaction is a private sector institution. Over several months now, we've listened to the evidence led at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. These testimonies, read together with the work of investigative journalists, as well as the reports from the public investigative bodies, as well as with our own reports. If one considers a combination of these reports, it's quite clear that there are some worrying tendencies around how public sector institutions benefit improperly from the existing weaknesses in the state. This raises some key questions for boards of private sector institutions on whether, in their oversight role, they are effective in ensuring that the institutions are indeed meeting the appropriate interests of shareholders and relevant stakeholders. Now, earlier I promised to demonstrate how in our daily professional lives we can make a lasting impact on the lives of South Africans. And I'm not talking about acts of charity, which are important. I am talking about making sure that the decisions we make when we sit at the boardroom table are about giving people better education, better quality healthcare, and other such enablers like fast and affordable internet access so that they can raise their personal incomes, which ultimately also is good for business. Knowing what we know about the inequalities of our country, we all must ask ourselves a few questions and act accordingly. Question would be, are we all in? Knowing the statistics about racial, gender, and other pressing inequalities, are we actively combating the injustices in the companies that we run or in the organizations that we oversee? How about the suppliers of our businesses? Do we ask them to prove that they're doing enough to foster socio-economic justice? Or are we happy to simply compile reports about our narrow compliance, whether it's in the area of skills development, employment equity, enterprise and supply development, procurement management? All of those areas provide opportunities for us to think differently and act differently. Are we owning the problems of our country by doing what we can and influencing those around us to do the same? Do we hold one another account insofar as our social contract rests with the rest of society? Our economy used to be heavily dependent on mining and other extractive industries. And in many ways, we're still an economy that continues to export commodities to other countries to manufacture value-added goods that they then sell back to us. Many amongst us here sit on boards or run companies that are either part of this extractive economy or operate alongside it. Others are responsible for regulating the operations of the same industry. So the question is, when we make different decisions, are we using our influence? Are we making the type of decisions that would get us to add more value locally, create more jobs that pay better, improve the content of our higher education so that we increase the employability of graduates, and therefore help communities that are affected by the extractive industries so that they derive more economic benefit from their resources? And these are things we should be worried about in the course of executing our duties on oversight, such that we are more about adding value rather than routine compliance, or worse still, simply around extraction. Are we doing enough to stop the flow of illicit capital flows? Global Financial Integrity estimates that illicit financial flows deprive African countries of at least $50 billion annually, and they've possibly deprived them of up to $1 trillion over the 50 years up to 2016. Are we actively ensuring that we eliminate practices of overpricing or underpricing of trade deals, inappropriate transfer pricing, using tax havens so that we erode the tax revenue base that's available to some governments? Are we ensuring that our institutions are either by commission or in omission not involved in reducing the value that's available for governments that are supposed to then use that revenue to deliver public services? So these are the questions we ought to ask ourselves in the course of executing our duties on oversight. Are we confident that the people we lead are indeed assimilating the right mentality and culture to become the agents of change for a better society? Or are we happy to let short-term financial gains override our ethical obligation to create an inclusive economy for the benefit of future generations? Master of Ceremonies, my questions do echo those that have been raised by most of the speakers that have delivered the chairman's report at this very event over the past 6 years. For example, in her chairman's report in 2020, the chairman of ABSA Group, Ms. Wendy Lucas-Bull, she talked about the need to address the downward spiral through drastic changes in the composition and efficacy of government spend. She highlighted the need for a clear response that all stakeholders can support and called for a relentless focus on the implementation of an agreed social compact and called upon government, organized business, labor, and civil society to collaborate in this regard. She was calling upon us here to take the lead, to collectively enable effective oversight. In 2019, Ms. Phuthi Mahanyele-Dabengwa, who was then the executive chairperson of Sigma Capital, she stressed the importance of education in addressing the socio-economic problem of what has been termed the ninja generation, that of young people with no income, no jobs, and no assets. Education that is situated in the needs of the labor market, that makes sure that young people are employable, and also make sure that entrepreneurship is an option for them. That's what she was calling for. And she cautioned that without oversight and governance in procurement, the enterprises that these young people then venture into would not manage to break into the industries of their choice. Each chairman's report to date has tackled pertinent issues and how, as leaders, we can help strengthen democracy by prioritizing the broader society in the performance of our board duties. Nicholas Kruger's speech at the inaugural directors event emphasized how South Africa could grow faster and become more equitable only if it mobilized all of its resources with visionary and value-based leadership, with policy certainty, a positive attitude, and greater collaboration. Kruger's point about how, as leaders, we are accountable to our broader society, not only to the narrow, short-term financial interests. That message was aligned with the sentiments of Dr. Roel Khoza, the former chairman and non-executive director of Nedbank. Dr. Khoza spoke of the boards not operating in a vacuum, but rather in the context of their environment, so that they become vision-led, purpose-driven harbingers of the future. Because destiny, he said, is not a matter of chance, but of choice. So in delivering this chairman's report, I've tried to appeal to the collective conscience of everyone in this esteemed audience to rekindle our responsibility to society. I've also highlighted the scale of inequality, which can only be closed by institutions led by leaders who are conscious and conscientious and who are committed to reimagining their role. This does not mean veering from our primary mandate and that of the organizations we serve, not at all. It rather signifies that being diligent and staying true to our ethical obligations, and more importantly, by reimagining our role at a pace that is faster than the rate of changes in the environment. A failure to keep up with the pace of change will make it difficult for us to deal with future external shocks like we've experienced now around COVID-19. And here we bring to mind others such as Ebola, the natural disasters, and even the global credit crunch of 2008. As my fellow speaker said earlier on, there will be future disasters. There will be future emergencies. The question is, how do we prepare ourselves so that we can respond even better? A careful assessment of public sentiment in the past few weeks and months show how impatient people are because oversight was sacrificed, a sentiment that we're also experiencing through the work we do at the AGSA. The impatience gets expressed in the form of service delivery protests at times, which themselves are becoming more clinically targeted. For example, someone claiming to represent Soweto Parliament circulated a video on social media just this past week. He called on people from Soweto to rise up against one state owned enterprise by staging a sit-in at its headquarters in Sunning Hill. I guess you can imagine which one it is. And he was wanting people to do this instead of burning and damaging property in Soweto where they live. Other people expressed their impatience in outright criminal activities. The rising tide of crime is in part a symbol of too many young people who have lost faith in the establishment. Failed oversight in the establishment to them justifies rebelling against the state. So I'm going to end off by highlighting the importance of us operating not with a narrow focus, but embracing our broader duties to society. We can and should better to turn the fortunes of humankind around by dreaming of flying way above our roof and by being dreamers who are willing and doing and not wishing and waiting. And I can assure you of similar commitment that we've made as an institution that I lead. And we will not abandon our own responsibility. I thank you for your kind attention and for allowing me to participate in this session from a distance as you have done. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.